The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Hopefully the last day that I am not in studio. Things are moving along with my move. Moving is the worst. It is absolutely horrible, stressful, total disaster. But it should be over soon, Pat. That's the good news. Hopefully not too much longer. And I can't wait for it to end.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you're not going completely homeless. You have a place to do the show out of, at least for the meantime, right?
Yes, certainly. And let's get to the bonus show. Uninterrupted by my moving. So we reported, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? Usually it's June that we get a set of decisions from the Supreme Court as to what they will and won't be hearing. We reported to you that the Supreme Court has basically punted on gerrymandering, and Democrats are now making it a campaign issue. We're increasingly seeing Democrats actually talk about the fact that the Supreme Court has decided not to weigh in on whether it is or isn't constitutional for political parties to draw districts in a way that favors one party over another. This is not so much about the specifics of gerrymandering, because we've talked, Pat, about how we've had varied decisions at the state level about whether political gerrymandering is okay as long as it's not also being done around, for example, racial lines or a protected class. There have been different results in different states. So there's sort of like a broader meta question, which is, are voters in a sense being disenfranchised at the constitutional level, even by political gerrymandering at all? The Supreme Court is not weighing into that, and increasingly you're seeing Democrats, including those within the state level and particularly in Texas, make this a campaign issue. My question is a pragmatic one. Is this a good campaign issue for Democrats? Because on the one hand, we know that Democrats are at a disadvantage, partially because of the rural-urban divide, partially because of who was in power at the time of the 2010 census. But is this a voting issue that you can get people excited about?
I don't think it is, and the reason why is because there's such a big learning curve, right? You know, the right wing will encourage their supporters to go out and vote because they'll talk about people taking your jobs and the illegals coming in and all that stuff. That's very straightforward, right? People get that right away. There's no explanation necessary. A lot of people don't know what gerrymandering is, so you have to talk about the census and the redistricting process. You've already lost people, and that's not going to encourage people to go out and vote. It is very important. It's one of those meta issues, but if you have to explain an issue to someone first, good luck with that.
There's this idea that if you can't explain a political issue to people clearly in 30 seconds or less, that it's going to be difficult to get people to vote around that issue. And that's why, you know, the whole thing, that's where Democrats are sometimes at a disadvantage, because on the same issue, Republicans can explain it in under 30 seconds and Democrats can't, because they're operating in the real world of gray area. So like abortion's a good example, right? Republicans can explain that in under 30 seconds. They go, we shouldn't kill kids and abortion is murder because at conception, you're talking about a person. Agree or disagree, that's a simple way of explaining what you at least claim the issue is. Republicans would, Democrats on the other hand, or those who are pro-choice, have a much harder time explaining it in under 30 seconds, because first you've got to start with either refuting what the Republicans argue, that it's not so clear when a fetus becomes a person, that you're not trying to allow all abortion, but that you've lost, right?
Yeah.
You've already lost. And when it comes to gerrymandering, I don't know how, even if you can pretty clearly explain what it is, like the way that districts are drawn puts one party at a disadvantage, or it makes your vote worth less. You then still have to explain to people what you mean by their vote is worth less, because as far as people know, they still get one vote.
And I also wonder what the Democratic pitch is, right? Are they saying that you should put us in charge of the state legislatures so that we can gerrymander for the good of ourselves? Or are they saying that you should put us in charge so that we can advocate for like a bipartisan commission and, you know, solve this problem altogether?
Which is far less sexy.
Yeah, far less sexy. I mean, I'd rather see that commission, right, to do away with this issue altogether. But it's not Democrats fighting dirty, and I kind of want to see that in some respect too.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. So this is we'll see how it works for these Texas Republicans that are making an issue. There's a new study which says that doctors on average spend 11 seconds listening to patients before interrupting them. This is a team from the US and Mexico that studied clinical encounters between patients and doctors, and it was published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. And what they found was that based on 112 recorded meetings between doctors and patients at general practices in Minnesota and Wisconsin, as well as Mayo Clinic affiliated clinics, scientists found that doctors spent 11 seconds on average listening to a patient describe their reasons for visiting before interrupting. The team only counted how long it took for a doctor to interrupt if the doctor first said something like, "What can I do for you today?" or "Tell me what brings you in today." If the conversation started in a different way, they didn't necessarily do that. And the study found that 67% of patients were interrupted after responding, and only 36% of doctors even ask questions that invite patients to direct the focus of the conversation. Specialists reportedly spend even less time listening than primary care doctors, one would imagine, because they have more information about exactly what brings the patient in. This is horrible. I've not actually had this experience. I don't know, Pat, or at least my impression is not that I've had this experience. Maybe if I had a recording of my doctor's visits, I am being interrupted in some way after 11 or 15 seconds. But my recollection is that the doctor, and maybe it's because I start with a really concise summary of why I'm there and then allow the doctor to ask me more questions. I don't have the experience of feeling like I'm interrupted by the doctor before I explain what's going on.
Yeah, maybe it's two things. One, you have pretty good communication skills. After all, you do a show, so you can explain the problem that you're experiencing, right? And number
Maybe.
two, maybe you just have a good doctor, right, who's willing to hear you out. I think there's communication skills lacking on both ends for the majority of people, both the doctors not receiving the right training and people not able to articulate what's going on with them.
Yeah, and this leads also to, it's a very common thing that people feel as though they didn't really understand what the diagnosis is or what they're supposed to do. And part of that is because of the tone that's set right away. If your doctor does interrupt you very quickly, that immediately sets the tone that they don't have much time, that they need to move on, that extraneous questions are not going to be seen favorably. And thus, that makes it so patients ask fewer follow-up questions and end up leaving without clear instructions. And that's something I know personally a lot of people that do experience. They say, I did feel like the guy was knowledgeable, but almost in an intimidating way.
Yeah.
And it's interesting I say guy because I feel like it happens more often with male doctors. The people I know who have female doctors, often, it's totally anecdotal, feel like they actually were more comfortable asking questions. They say I didn't want to really follow up because I felt that they had to move on.
Yeah,
Let's talk
obviously
about. Oh yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Okay, I
I'm
was just
sorry.
going to say, obviously these doctors have to go from one room to another, and they're super pressed for time. They may only have a few minutes to deal with you. I think it also has to do with burnout too, right? Because they're spending, say, 12 hours, 16 hours of their day just at work doing this long shift. They get burnt out, and I think it's better to schedule your doctor's appointments in the beginning of the day so you can get someone who's more willing to pay attention to you.
What you're saying, there is a book by Daniel Pink called When, and it points out that there are times of day where humans are just better at what they're doing, and it has to do with cycles and lighting, sunlight, so many things. And everything from medical errors to misdiagnoses go up significantly in the afternoon. So what you're saying, Pat, is actually demonstrated by a number of different studies. Okay, there's a study that has been conducted in New Zealand about the idea of a 4-day work week versus a 5-day work week and how productivity changes. And what the study found in Wellington, New Zealand, at a particular wealth management firm called Perpetual Guardian, was that there was a 24% increase in productivity and a feeling of better work-life balance when the work week was shortened to 4 days, even if those days are a little bit longer. And you know what? We've basically considered this in our work week, Pat, which is that we produce the shows. Like the most intense work of the week is the actual production of the show. We've concentrated that in 4 of the 5 weekdays. And Friday is a sort of different type of day, with some exceptions, right? Depending on what's going on. Where Friday, it's sort of a social media, get caught up on stuff, miscellaneous once a week tasks rather than the Monday through Thursday back and forth tasks, like the repetitive tasks. And I feel that it is better because my Friday feels a lot different than any of the Monday through Thursday days. And I think even though we're still working Friday, it's a totally different type of day. It's much less precisely timed. Things can be done in a much more flexible way. I think it works pretty well for us.
Yeah, it feels kind of like an extension of the weekend, and then that's great because, you know, you have about half your time off, right? Between Thursday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. All that time you can focus on things that you want to do with your life, and you have a good work-life balance there. And I wish, you know, more companies would implement that sort of style because it works well for us, and I think it works well for productivity in general.
Yeah, I'm sure that you can find examples of businesses that wouldn't benefit from it, and it would be because of the specific dynamics of the business. And there's businesses that are not even of a type where this, like,
Retail or restaurants.
Retail, sure. Although even for retail, you could make the case that the store would get better productivity from its employees if they had more employees working a shorter week, right? That would be, of course, at their cost, but do they make up for it with higher productivity? But this is something I'm super interested in, and I think we're going to sort of continue exploring ways in which we can consolidate tasks and that type of thing.
Do you think the American worker will point to this study and show people that, you know, the 4-day work week is actually better in a lot of ways, and we should push for working fewer hours every week? I wonder, because I'm pretty skeptical. I think that work has just become so fetishized in our society in the United States that there's like a sense of pride that goes along with it, and people are not going to want to advocate for working less because, you know, it cuts at their pride. It makes them look like they're weak, or I don't know what it is, but we have this weird stigma against that.
What are you, a lazy French communist that only wants to work 4 days a week or whatever? Yeah, no, that's a huge problem, and it's actually part of why a lot of people are sort of developing what we might call workaholism. Okay, that's it for today. Farron Cousins filling in for me tomorrow, as I will be, hopefully, if nothing goes wrong, finally moving. And then the plan is I will be back in studio on Wednesday, so we will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.